go. Quick fade out of the music. I don't quite have the controls or the technical capabilities to do anything Fatboy Slim like. Welcome back to another episode, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to see you, sort of, in this format. Thanks for joining us again. Bob, how's your week going? How's things? It's been a while. You're looking very resplendent with the full beard now.
Yeah, been away on a desert island for a couple of weeks, relaxing, but trying to get back into it. And have you missed me?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My Tuesdays aren't the same without you. I have no one to talk to. The dog is nowhere near as responsive.
Yeah, I don't have any friends either.
Yeah, the life we lead. It's all rock and roll razzmatazz over here.
Yeah. So what are we doing today then, Ben?
So we've got an interview special in for today, and I was as as much in the dark about this area of work when it was first mentioned a couple of weeks ago. So I do what I normally do, and I hit the books. You know, that's one of the byproducts of being a PI. You get a lot of reading time on your hands, so it was a perfect opportunity to swat up, as it were. Bob, how about you introduce the fella?
Yeah, I'm really pleased that he's agreed to come on. It's Pete Rushmer. I looked it up, Pete, and it's 10 years ago. It's 2016 that I first met you, I think, or it's very soon after that. And it's fair to say you've come a long way since those days. Today, you've got your own company, Flagstaff, I think Partners now, Flagstaff Partners.
Yeah.
20 years of experience in leadership. I see you've written specialist in building high performance teams. And you've got this new performance trifecta, which is something which I'd like to start with. So nice to see you, Pete. And thanks for coming on, repaying the compliment because I've been a guest on your podcast quite a while ago. I should also add that you're a very brave person, like Ben, actually. You've both done TEDx, which is something which I'd never put myself through. All kudos to you for that. So, Pete, it's been 10 years. Catch me up on it.
What's appreciate
the performance trifecta?
Yeah, appreciate that, Bob. Thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be on the podcast with you both. The 10, I don't know where the time's gone, by the way. 10 years, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? But the performance trifecta really came about with sort of my personal challenges around realizing that I never really fitted in the corporate environment that I grew up in, and understanding really where ultimately I'd go into a new role, I'd feel very energized about the work I was doing, I'd be able to get some great results. But over time, after sort of maybe 2 or 3 years, I'd realized that my energy was waning. There was a bit of an issue, and I didn't really understand sort of what that was. And no harder time was that than around 2021, when I was about 3 years into founding Flagship Partners, the business I was running. And I sort of had this old sort of program around what I thought success would look like based on, the experience that I'd had to date, really, and understanding what I thought good business looked like, which was, being wealthy, having an amazing car, building a lovely house for the family, all of the financial success that came with that. And during that time, I discovered this thing called motivational mapping. And I did a map at the time, and it was just really interesting that actually, despite running my own business, despite being sort of in charge of my own destiny, so to speak, and essentially living what many people think is the dream when you're your own boss, I realized that actually I was motivated by very different things. Yes, there was an element of value creation and wealth creation in there as a motivation, but actually I was also motivated by meaning and purpose, having freedom and autonomy, being creative as well. So actually what I realized was the vision and the direction in which I was heading was not really aligned with those motivations. So for me to really achieve and perform as well as I could, I needed to make sure that the vision and the direction I was heading in actually aligned with how I was energized and how I was most motivated, because that would create the best performance for me. And I'd set about discovering the skills certainly new skills, but also unlearning some of the old behaviors and some of the old patterns that I had previously, around working too much. Because if I overwork, then I'm never going to meet that motivation around having freedom and autonomy, for example, because I'll always feel just chained to the business, feel chained to working all the time. So yeah, it's been a really interesting process that I've personally gone through, and more recently I've been working with some of my clients from a coaching perspective and a development perspective around helping them build that vision, helping them understand how they're motivated through the mapping process, and helping them achieve. Certainly there's an element of the trifecta supporting organizational performance, but also just on an individual level as well. It's something that I've found really, really rewarding, working with the business owners who often feel a bit disillusioned, a bit lonely, and challenged at the situation they find themselves in, because largely speaking, people expect them to be, you know, absolutely delighted with how life's turning out for them.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna have to mention we've got Paolo joining in on Instagram at the minute. Whoa, that's on my face. Let's move that down. Let's get rid of that straight away. Paolo says he's also kind of having problems with motivation in his area, especially after noticing technology, which is his area, will be the demise of civilization and rationality instead of the opposite, and that he was also motivated by problem solving, but after getting into the field, he noticed that it's not even as big a part of it as when he was doing it as a hobby. Okay, Paulo is a wonderful chap from Brazil, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for joining in, Paulo. Bob?
One thing, Pete, you talked about motivation and everything, and I can remember back to when I first met you, and I was running a course for a company, and you were working there at the time.
Sure.
And I remember, because it's what I do, seeing you and thinking of you in my mind, because tend to sort of visualize strangely. And I saw you as a bit of a caged tiger there. You seem to be different, not an outsider so much, but different to the people that you were with. And it's fair to say that it was a bit of a mixed bunch at that time, because it was sales, and we had, I think at that time, they had about 3 or 4 old type salespeople, and then they had a new breed, and you were definitely one of the new breed. It didn't come as any surprise when I heard that you'd gone out on your own, because I could see at that, even at that time, you were frustrated. Would that be about right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Bob. And I don't get me wrong, I absolutely the training process I went through with you was just absolute incredible and eye-opening, and really sort of pushed me along my personal development journey as well. But I think your observation was very right in that I'd I'd felt quite shackled. I felt quite shackled working both in a corporate environment, and
Yeah.
prior to that, I'd worked in a smaller business and it felt quite shackled as well. And I think one of the things I've learned is that I'm very focused in my personal development. I spend a lot of time reading and developing and evaluating, reflecting on the things and the experiences that I have, which means that I'm very growth focused as well. And as soon as I feel, one of the things I've learned, I suppose, is as soon as that I feel held back, I then feel a little bit trapped, and I find that very de-energizing as well. And I wonder how many other people are out there who are very growth focused as well, and don't really get the opportunity to develop all those skills, because a business needs them, or an organization needs them to kind of just stay in their lane and do that job that they want to do, and they can find that quite suffocating.
Mm.
Yeah.
Ben, you got anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm, not to blow smoke in your general direction. I think I'd have to know you a little bit longer before I blow smoke in the usual places. But I was following your videos about the trifecta. The discussions of energy, direction, skills. I think it's a wonderful breakdown. Because I have a similar system based around energy and movement. And I always qualify, it's my own bias. When I say energy, I don't mean anything spiritual. I
Okay.
mean, I mean literally the energy that you have from sleeping and eating and feeling and thinking and this type of thing. Quick question: when was the last time you trusted your memory? but your memory without checking a device. Most people don't lose intelligence. They lose discipline of attention. MindForge is a structured training system that is designed to rebuild focus, recall, and your mental stamina, but to do so in just 10 minutes a day. No productivity hacks, no dopamine tricks, no supplements you need to swallow, just cognitive conditioning. So if you want your mind to feel sharper within a week, omniscient-insights.com/mindforge, or right there. Train your mind like it matters. Because the argument can be made that without it, the other two don't get to function at what's the best word, at capacity, regardless of how well designed they are, whether it be investigators, analysts, corporate professionals. There is that kind of almost routine diagnosis of your performance across this single dimension that can inadvertently lead to this lack of motivation becoming kind of a pandemic in wherever it is that somebody works. The trifecta, as my understanding of it is from your videos, forces this structured three-part check before any conclusion is drawn. And I think that's such a wonderful reflection of human behavior as well, because en masse, from investigations, from conversations, from anything that seems to matter or strike up our feelings, we as humans, we have a tendency to jump towards an answer, an end game, and then kind of retrospectively analyze all of the information to try and confirm the original hypothesis. It seems like the trifecta sets it up to be able to go in accordance with the information, break it down in ways that's digestible, that's understandable, that speaks towards productive communications along that way. Would you say that energy is the biggest factor, maybe, for people that haven't had the good fortune to come across your videos yet?
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying there. And do you know it's really interesting because for me it's absolutely it's the foundation that drives performance is the energy. And one of the things that we often get wrong is we start, and interestingly, I start with direction in the book and I end with energy. When the reality is I think if I started with energy, I'd lose people along the way. But the underpinning, the underpinning of the theory is the energy. If we lose the energy or we lack the motivation to do something, performance can never be achieved. It doesn't matter what direction we're heading or how skillful, how well trained, how much expertise we have. Ultimately, the performance is essentially driven by that energy. I wondered, are you guys interested in hearing more about the motivational theory and the nine motivators behind the mapping process? So, thank you.
I'll speak for myself, Bob. Sorry.
Yeah,
So,
nice. No, yeah.
Mapping's really, I find mapping really interesting. It was created by a guy called James Sale who lives in Bournemouth in the UK. And he used some other sort of survey process to create motivational map. And I think interestingly, it's nowhere near had the traction that the likes of Discovery, Insights, and Disc and those kinds of profiling tools have had. But I actually think that I think motivational maps personally will be a surveying process that's just going to grow over time, and as it gets more traction, people are going to realize the value of it. So how things like Disc work is that they work out color profiles, generally speaking, about how extroverted or introverted somebody is and how task and people focused they are. So it's relatively speaking, I suppose it'll evolve over time, but my experience is that largely it's kind of personality based and it's kind of fixed. The difference with motivation is it recognizes that actually our emotional and energy needs evolve over time. So actually they'll change and it aligns more with Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
So there's three key clusters to the nine motivators. You've got the green relationship motivators, which are a friend, their star, and the defender. So these are motivations that are built around relationships, but the defender likes a status quo. They like security, stability. There was a little bit of that in what Paolo was saying, being resistant to change around the technology evolving.
Yeah.
So people can get, there's an element of risk around that as well. The star is around needing recognition, peer recognition, wanting to stand out for the contribution someone makes individually to a team. And then that third one, which is friend, about having those nurtured relationships with other people. So this is kind of like your green sort of foundational tier. And people will have motivational preferences across the tiers. They might have a green, a red, and a blue, for example, in their profile. But the next is the achievement profiles, which are red. That's the red cluster. And there's three in there. You've got the expert, you've got the builder, and then you've got, why's my mind gone blank? Expert, builder, and director. So director seeks control, mastery over their environment. They like to make decisions. They like to just be in control of people, decisions, and things that are going on. The expert thrives on their knowledge, their expertise, and developing those and growing those. So they like to be the go-to expert in their business or in their area, and they like to really nurture and grow that. So you'll often see experts or people motivated by expert will often be in specialized industries, something or a specialized role. They might be the go-to expert at what they do. And then you've got the builder, who is a financial who's ultimately is around building wealth, value. They're motivated by money, which is interesting because you speak to people, what are you motivated by at work? Most people will go money. How do I motivate you more? I'll give you more money. But interestingly, it's only one of nine. So I always find that quite fascinating. And then the final group of the final group of three is the growth motivators. And there you've got your searcher, which is around having meaning and purpose. This is your self-actualization level from a Maslow's hierarchy perspective. So you've got searcher, you've got spirit, which is around freedom and autonomy, and then you've got creator, which is about creating, innovating, coming up with new ideas. And people tend to have a mixture of all of those. And doing the survey, you find out what people's preferences are, but you also find how well they're being met in their current situation. So you can find also how satisfied they are by those motivations. And what happens is over time, those different needs obviously evolve based on someone's personal circumstances, and you can help to essentially align someone's performance around what motivates them, and then obviously where's the direction they're heading from a career perspective, and how do we nurture the skills to enable to deliver that high performance. So I hope the model works whether someone is early in their career or obviously later in their career as well, and looking towards their long-term mastery as well.
Wow, that's quite in depth.
Yeah,
Sorry, yeah, I went into loads of detail there.
Love it.
No,
No, speaking my language, bring it more.
yeah.
Oh, okay. Was there anything
It,
that resonated with you two from a
yeah,
motivational
certainly.
perspective?
Yeah, I think for me it resonates because it matches a lot of what I do, and it's it's human behavior we're talking about, and human thought and being, intrinsic and extrinsic, about how we behave. And so, although we come at things from different angles, it's amazing how the results and the methodology that we get to, and Maslow is in everything. It's what we do. We do the 6 A's of awareness and acceptance of what people want, because that's where more, especially with sales, where I come into this sort of area, is looking at what people want. People sell because they think they know what people need, but they don't actually understand what people want to be able to get to the position to buy. And it's much easier to get to, if you can get to that position and you really want to get people to buy from you because they like you, not because you've had to sell hard to them. And so a lot of what you've said there, I'm a bit skeptical in some ways, because I think this particularly is very badly used by a lot of companies. They see it as an end product when it's just part of a process. And if you use it badly, it is a bit like typing people, isn't it? And I think my personal opinion is that behaviour isn't binary. You can't put people in boxes. You can maybe identify where they might fit, but we all wear masks, and we all try to be something that we think other people want us to be, and all of
Mm,
this sort of thing. And so
sure.
understand, again, for me, you can't understand other people and work with other people until you really know yourself.
Yeah, that makes real sense, Bob, and I absolutely agree with you. One of my fundamental principles is that people aren't their behaviours.
Yeah,
The behaviours are can be modified or changed depending on someone's values and
yeah,
beliefs mechanisms, and often behaviour is ultimately we are. Um, I'm going to start getting a bit deep and meaningful, but the behaviour the reality is we are the observing self, and we observe the behavior we then carry
yeah,
out. And yeah, I fundamentally agree with that. And I think that with any profiling tool, there is a risk with a practitioner who lacks the skill and understanding of how of that, I suppose, of how people work. You do risk pigeonholing people and going, oh, they're this and they're that and what have you. And in reality
Mm,
is at this time in their lives, they've got this preference. That's not fixed, that's movable. And ultimately, the reality is the survey results are only really a set of answers to a survey that was taken at a certain point in time,
sure,
and they could retake that survey at another point in
yeah,
time and the results will be very different. um, and actually the interesting part of the map process that is kind of one of the things I find most exciting is I'll read the report that comes, but then there's a debrief process. So I'll then ask some really open questions around the map tells me that. So for example, if I speak with someone who is a high spirit, for example, so they've got come out with a freedom and autonomy. I choose that one because that's a high motivator for me. But I would say the map's telling me that you've got a high spirit, an autonomy motivator. How's that going for you? And I'll just ask a really open
yeah,
question, and then I'll get whatever their
mm,
interpretation of that is. And one person, that their interpretation of that and how it drives what they do will be totally different to the next person,
yeah,
totally different. And that's
yeah.
and that's again lies into the point you make around you can't really pigeonhole people because the meaning of that motivation is very different for the two people. One might be at the end of their career and getting very fed up, and another one could be trapped at a lower level early in their career who's seeking the freedom of elevating themselves to something different. And they're two very different drivers that are sort of looking at a similar behavior from very
Mm,
different angles.
mm,
mm. It's like with a lot of tools. The tool is about the practitioner, as you've both stated perfectly. If you're relying on the tool to do your processing for you, you're not profiling anything. The tool is. You're just running information through whatever it is, no matter how star spangled awesome it apparently is, and that's why I like the direction of this. That's why I like the direction of Maslov. That's why I like the direction of the circumplex that Bob introduced me to. These invite engagement and energy from the practitioner to be able to determine something. And the reason I say determine is because it reminds me of self-determination theory.
mm,
This establishment that sustained performance, it requires competence, it requires autonomy, it requires relatedness, but all three are conditions. They're not traits. So like with the maps and the trifecta, it's really operationalizing that into a framework where the energy that's kind of put in to the conversation that you're having is
mm,
is gonna is gonna accurately well, accurately might be too strong a word. It's gonna give you more of an opportunity to glean the requisite degree of information that you need from it. It's the passivity. It might relate to Paulo within his issues with technology. As I understand it, there are people that lean on AI to do their thinking, their creating, their writing, their whatever they do with it, and it absolves a lot of the responsibility and the work of the individual in that level. uh, in terms of why people should care from a behavioral standpoint, from a human standpoint, every performance conversation that skips a pillar, out of the trifecta, is a guess. And for me, guessing is tantamount to swearing. Because it's essentially you as a human being going, I don't know, but I'm confident. Because
Mm,
a guess by every definition, whether it be the noun, verb, or adjective, means you're moving forward confidently on information that you haven't got. So
mm,
this has operational consequences in any context where people matter to outcomes. Just because we've spoken a lot about performance within a working dynamic, I would imagine. So please correct me if I'm wrong. That this absolutely iterates out into all conversation. All
mm.
relational discussions, all interactions. They perform, if you'll allow me to labor the metaphor a little bit further. Would that be about fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've, I've, you've kind of blown my brains in a way that I've thought about, in the way that I'm now thinking about the same matter. I think when I spoke just then, one of the points that I wanted to add, which I think feeds into the point you're making, is that any conversation with a human, with a person around performance, is the key thing is that we are all nine motivators. We just have certain
Mm,
preferences at
mm,
certain times. And then what's really useful is that, um, particularly those who manage and lead others, then when they have those conversations, and
Here's the truth: clarity under pressure isn't natural, it's trained. Axiom is a cognitive framework, one that is designed to improve your reasoning, to improve your memory, and then the subsequent decision making that goes along with that. Not theory focused, not just inspirational quotes, mental architecture. So if you want to think clearly and do so when it counts, go to omniscient-insights.com/axiom, or right there, because in chaos, the clear thinker wins.
and when I say that as in a lead context,
Mm,
that could be a parenting conversation. It could be a sports leader. It could be anyone who's wearing a leadership hat, not just from a business or organizational perspective in that sense, but anyone who's leading can kind of, if they start to recognize that the person in front of me has needs around security and stability, they have needs around growth and autonomy, around what their meaning and purpose
mm,
is, and you start to recognize those people have those, that adds a whole level of quality to the conversation around
Mm.
how we're supporting someone else to meet their needs and what direction they're heading in their life, what what skills they need to be able to cope with that. So this translates as much into a conversation from me speaking to my team at work, or maybe me even planning my own long-term future, as it does to me sitting with my daughter today. My daughter, she's going through her GCSEs, and me having that conversation around what are her needs, and around getting her in the best possible place to achieve the best possible outcome for her exams that are coming up. Because we're sat with her teachers, and she's getting very upset because the reality is she needs a little bit of extra support due to some
mm,
additional learning needs around, and actually they weren't provided in the mock exam, and therefore she's lost confidence in the process with the teaching staff, and is looking for some
mm,
reassurance that actually the promises they make will be there, and there's a level of need for that security and
mm,
stability for her to be able to go and perform. And sort of, if I didn't really understand these concepts as well as I did, I wouldn't
Mm.
necessarily understand the behavior she's exhibiting in
mm,
that in that environment. Because
mm,
um So yeah, the answer is yes, and I think it is on varying levels, regardless of whether it's a work context or a home life context or
Mm.
someone in the street that we meet.
Yeah, I think, I don't want to say that I'm down on all types of testing or
Mm,
metrics or anything, because intrinsically, not everyone, but the vast majority of people are field dependent. We have to know the field we're operating in, the boundaries that we're operating in, both in ourselves and in the environments we work at. And that, and so I think helping people understand what um, their colours are, or whatever the metrics are you're using, is important, as long as it's alongside
Mm,
other things. And I mean, we use uh, it was mentioned there by Ben. I used a circumplex, which is Timothy Leary, and that sort of quantifies people in conversations into four types. They're either leading, they're controlling, they're collaborating, or they're observing. But that doesn't mean that's what they're going to be and that's who they are. That means that at that moment they are that, but they may have to move to something else. Especially an observer would have to move to another position within that circumplex to get themselves heard
sure.
within that environment. And so I think we've got to be fluid with these things.
Yeah.
And if we try to be, and that's where I get not annoyed, but I find it frustrating when companies think, and I'll always remember a guy who had done something very, very bad and was being expelled from a company, and speaking to the guy and say, I don't know why he's done that. His
mm,
psychometric test said that he was very reliable and everything. And you just think, yeah, he did. Maybe he was at that time,
Yeah.
but that's not his day-to-day life, is it? Life gets in
No.
the way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that really sits with me, Bob, actually from the training we did,
Yeah,
and something that so it's really interesting that sometimes when you look for when the time's right, the learning will appear, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So interestingly, there was something that I remember, and you just mentioned it there. You talk a lot about intrinsic and extrinsic. So one of the things one of the things that's really interesting is when I was at my most unhappy with sort of how things were going, what I realized was that a lot of my goals were extrinsic and external to me rather
yeah,
than internal.
mm,
And the interesting process of going through this was helped me to understand that actually I needed to let go of a lot of the extrinsic needs that I was after, because the reality is they wouldn't create fulfillment and therefore performance. I was kind of chasing all the wrong things, and
mm,
the intrinsic stuff is far more important to me. And it was
mm,
really interesting that when that actually clicked, I went back to the training we'd had in my head to 2016 and was
mm,
like, that's what Bob was talking about. And actually, I really get it now. It's really interesting, isn't it?
mm,
How sometimes, as you I believe you sort of we're never broken and then fixed, right? Or I don't believe that anyway. We're never really broken and fixed. We're just kind of on this evolutionary journey of
yeah,
understanding of and developing and learning. And it's very interesting how there's kind of a lesson here, but you learn part of the lesson and then you kind of
yeah.
go off about your stuff until which point you then learn the remainder of the lesson, which I found quite fascinating. Like sort of 5 6 years later, I'm sort of going,
Mm,
that's what he was talking about when we did that. This is the intrinsic extrinsic thing. Right, okay, I get
that's
it.
it.
I get it on a different level now anyway. So
mm.
yeah, fascinating.
Nothing provides a lesson quite like going through it,
Well, no, this is very true, exactly. And
eh?
but that is part of it. It is it's part of the experience, isn't it? Is that you really learn it when you're experiencing it.
Yeah, yeah,
Only if you let
absolutely.
yourself learn from it.
Mm,
I was always taught, working in law enforcement, it's good to make mistakes because you've never learned anything. You've never made mistakes, but it's not good to keep repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Sure. I suppose until that point, it's theoretical rather than practical, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's essentially you've learned the theoretical side of it, and then learning the practical, it kind of happens at a deeper level.
mm,
yeah. I think I could never teach something, and I worked at university for a while, and I had to go and do lectures of things that I didn't really understand, and I felt so vulnerable because what always gets me through is when people ask that what if question, and you just think, well, what would I have done? And if you can't do that,
Mhm.
if you're only relying on what you've read rather than what you've experienced, I think that puts you, what it would me, put me a bit of a disadvantage. That's just
Yeah.
me.
Well, you can, technically speaking, I mean, this is a weird example, but technically speaking, you can learn to swim from your bedroom. But you're never going to know if you can actually do it until you get in the bloody pool.
Unless you've got a waterbed.
Well, I mean, then things are going to go horribly wrong. Arguments, builders, the works, the whole thing. But you know, I was looking through some of James Sales's work earlier on, and it strikes that the the maps assessment gives you this kind of almost like a ranked motivational profile of sorts. So it makes each of these pillars measurable rather than speculative. And if you look at some of the research, particularly in sales as well, like everything from Project Aristotle at Google, right the way beyond, that this motivational misalignment is the most reliable predictor of disengagement. You know, the most reliable. So it might have been a kind of glib of me to make reference to the what's my motivation in the thumbnail for it, but it's kind of important. And when I say
Hmm.
kind of, that's flippant again. If you don't know why you're doing something, the label that you give it might not necessarily be it. So during those kinds of conversations that you get to have with the people that you work with, you might get to find out what actually does motivate them rather than what they say motivates them. Because I've met loads of people who've said, money, cars, holidays, and all the rest of it. But all they're really doing is working to try and get their way through some childhood issue that they never had lots when they were a kid, and they think
Hmm.
drowning their family and all of these toys and things is going to fill that hole. And I mean, that's like, I think I've had that twice ever as an example of a discovery conversation. So these things that we're talking about, they're not just quirky things that you hear on the internet. I mean, they can definitely start that way, but they have real practical use if you, the proverbial you who's listening, gives these things the time and the weight to sit with them. Like, you can, instead of asking what drives you, strike up a conversation about drivers, give you an opportunity to practice these kinds of things. And then what does that evidence tell you in relation to the maps? Where are the crossovers? Where are the disagreements? How does that work in this collaborative effort? I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it's a great thing. So we've got a kind of an unspoken rule that when we're coming to the end of episodes, we do like a Jerry Springer's final thoughts on the topic of conversation for parting ways. Pete, what would be your final thoughts on the discussion for this evening?
Yeah, I think in summary, I think that the most valuable point for me has been that um, a framework is about how we operate or how we support people within that framework. So I've built the performance trifecta to give some guidance and support for people when they read the book or when they access my work, whether that's with me or sort of through experiencing and reading the book. Is that it's a framework for them to then interpret and take away how best suits them. I really love the idea that people start to focus not on the vision first, not on the direction, but actually what really fills me up internally. What is it that I really want to get from the work I'm doing? And then going about building the skill set and a
Mm,
vision and direction of where they're heading, using the things that matter most to them at that time.
love that.
Hmm.
Love that. Bob?
Well, firstly, you've mentioned that you slipped it in there a few times. Is the book out?
Ah, yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, the book's out. I'll send a link over for you to be able to get it because I've not. Interestingly, I wanted to keep it a bit of a work in progress, so people can buy a copy of it as it is now, but I've not published it. So people can buy it from my website if they're interested to read it now. The principle was I wrote it as a manifesto rather than as a book. So as my theory essentially of how I believe performance should work. And what I've done is then use that to go about demonstrating it. So I'm going to do a sort of version 2 where I sort of put a lot of the evidence that I've gathered in the work I've been doing that are going to be added to the book to then make it a better quality proposition long term because I wanted it to evolve as I implemented it. So there is a copy of the book now. People can get that book. But prior to me publishing, I'm actually going to go in the next year or so. I'm going to actually write more to it, add to it, and then go about getting a publishing agreement for it. So that's where I'm at.
Brilliant. And the only other comment I've got is it makes me very happy that we're not alone. Ben, people like Ben and myself are working in this space, which is a bit of an antidote to the world that we're moving into, which is very much cyber related and artificial. It's good to know, and I think we'll always get work because at the end of the day, people will want it. And so it's good to hear another perspective on it. And we've got another guest next week who will have another perspective from another point of view about um, humans in high risk situations, investigative interviewing, which is what we're doing next week. So it's been really good to have you. And so thanks for coming on, Pete. And maybe we could do it again sometime.
That'd be amazing. That'd be my pleasure. I'd love to. Thank you both.
I'm gonna have to just get this in though. I mean, you mentioned your site, Pete, but what is it?
Oh, the website.
Yeah.
So the book is sold through my Pete Rushmer website, which is kind of my personal work. Interestingly, I have a concept which I'm working with business leaders on and business owners particularly called "It's Not So Lonely at the Top." So that is around dealing with and supporting other other people in leadership positions who feel supporting those who feel like they are most vulnerable and most lonely in the way that the weight of the responsibility that they carry day to day. That's sort of one of my big, when we talked about mission and purpose,
Yeah.
that's kind of my mission is to help those people discover that through self mastery they can solve a lot of their problems.
Love that. Love that. All right, guys. So I'm sure you'll be able to join us all in spirit in thanking Pete for his time and his insight. From me here, thank you very much, sir. I know I've definitely got a lot out of it. Some quality food for thought. But with that in mind, folks, we shall love you and leave you, and we will see you again soon for another episode. All right, folks, take it easy.